Hi everyone, Nick Credit, host of Nick's Seasonal Decor, and tonight you're watching me on Hometalk, and we're going to be designing lots of holiday bows. So bows are one of those things that you can basically place anywhere. I think they look amazing in wreaths, obviously. You can also be decorating your Christmas presents with it, just to add a nice little touch to it. So even if the receiver of the gift doesn't like the gift, at least they can admire the packaging. So I'm just going to cut some tails first. And when it comes to bow making, one thing I can't stress enough is that it totally depends on where you're placing your bow, and honestly how big or how small you want, or how full and thin you want your bows as well. So, you know, if you want to create super long tails, just cut them longer. These tails are going to be about 18 to 20 inches on either side, and we're just going to place those to the side for now. Then what we're going to do is start actually constructing our bow. So this ribbon is 1.5 inches and it's wired. So for those of you that might not have made a bow before, I want to quickly tell you and advise you that you must use wire ribbon if you want to, really keep these loops exactly where they are and keep them rigid. So this is a wired 1.5 inch ribbon. And we're going to start by taking our ribbon, creating one loop like that, taking our hand and just folding it over so that we can create our second loop. So I don't measure my loops. You, of course, can if you would like. I usually just eyeball it. If it looks good enough to the human eye, it looks good enough, once it's completed. But now is where people usually get a little bit confused. So we're going to take our ribbon, pinch it directly in the middle, and create a loop. So you might be wondering, why is this ribbon backwards? You can't see the print. And that's actually for a reason, because when you go ahead and gather your loop again, the pretty side is revealed on top. So you're going to repeat this process as many times as you would like. Keep in mind, the fewer loops you do, the more open your bow is going to be. And you don't necessarily want a super full bow for every single design. For instance, in lots of my wreaths, I actually create less loops. That way I have the possibility of coming back in with some ornaments or some greenery or decorations in between the loops. So for this bow, we are going to make it nice and full so you guys can get the full impact of it. But bows, like I said, don't just have to be added to wreaths or presents. You can also be adding them to lantern swags. You could be adding them to your lampposts outside, up and down your staircase, on a bottle of wine. The possibilities are endless when it comes to bows. So we're going to add another 3 or 4 loops. I usually like to do 4 or 5 on either side, really to create a nice and full bow with instant gratification. So we have 4 on this side now. We have 4 on this side. We're going to start with just 1 more, see where that gets us, and if need be, we can work in another loop. But I think 5 on either side should give us the bow that I'm trying to go for. So what we can do now is cut off our ribbon. And this part is critical to ensure that your bow doesn't fall apart. I always leave about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch, sometimes even longer, of an extra tail. That way, in case our pipe cleaner is not super tight, we still have a little bit of leverage keeping it from falling apart. But then what we can do is take our tails, place them behind our bow. So I cut those ahead of time just to save a little bit of time and keep us from having to maneuver with the bow in our hand and cut an extra tail. Then we can just take a pipe cleaner. Try to match your pipe cleaners to your project. That way you don't see them as much. So we're dealing with a red pipe cleaner. And just secure it by twisting it really tightly from behind. So here's what this bow looks like so far. It doesn't look like much, but now is the important step, which is to fluff. And fluffing is really critical to make sure your bows are as beautiful as you possibly can get them, like that. So here's our first bow. And actually, to create the tails for this, you have a couple different options. One of my favorite options is actually dovetailing. Another option is curling them up. And to curl them up, I want to show you guys different variations. Since it's wired ribbon, it holds its shape. So we're just going to take the end and kind of roll it over itself like we're rolling it back on the roll. And in doing so, it creates a really unique look that, adds a little bit of whimsy to your designs, having them curl like that. So that's one option. And another option available is to take the ends, fold them in half, and what is known as dovetailing. So you're going to fold in half and cut from the middle out towards the wired edge at an angle. And what that does is creates a really pretty finished edge to your ribbon. So this is the ultimate professional touch that you can do to the tails of your bows. So this bow technique is known as the traditional bow, and it's definitely a favorite among many. So here we have another roll of ribbon, and this ribbon is 2.5 inches. So typically the 2 sizes that I use in my shop are 1.5 inch ribbon and 2.5 inch ribbon. My personal favorite is actually the 1.5 inch. It just seems to give a daintier, lighter feel to your designs, but 2.5 inch is an incredibly popular ribbon as well. So we're just gonna take this bow and start creating our loops. So we're going to create one loop and two tails. And this bow technique is the best bow technique for using up leftovers. So if you only have a yard or two of each ribbon, put them to use in this. Even so much as a yard of a ribbon, you can create a really beautiful bow using this technique. So one loop on one side, two tails on the other. I don't actually measure anything, so the tails can be different lengths. I do like to keep the loop size rather similar if possible, but I don't, strive for exact and perfection. Now we're going to repeat that process, but alternate. So now we're going to have our two tails facing upwards towards the first loop we created. Create our second loop towards the two tails downwards. Cut it off. And you can kind of fluff as you go, or you can do one heavy fluff towards the end. It totally depends on what you want to do. But we're going to add about 3 or 4 more of these to create a nice full bow. So come back in with our next layer. And this is probably one of the easiest bow techniques you can do because there's really nothing too specific in it. So there's our third loop that we'll cut off now. We'll come back in with another loop. And you can do as many or as few loops as you would like. So I'm actually going to stop after this loop. I think that's enough, having 4 of them. But if you wanted to add more, you certainly can. It'll just create a more full bow. Take your pipe cleaner, secure your bow. And here we go. It's not looking like much. It's kind of rather ugly at this point. But you know what, you guys? Like I said, fluffing is the most important step. So before we fluff, what we're going to start doing is taking our ribbon and dovetailing. So for this technique, I actually prefer dovetailing as opposed to curling. So we're just going to take the ends, fold them in half, and cut from the middle out towards the wired edge. So go ahead and do that to all of them. And then what we can do in the next step is begin fluffing. So now it's time to fluff. I finished off dovetailing the 3 remaining tails, and now what we're going to do is start pulling those loops to one side, pulling the tails to the other side, and just trying to kind of proportionately space out the loops and the tails. I don't want too many tails on one side and not enough on the other. So as I've said before, bows are totally customizable. Feel free to use whatever size ribbon, whatever color combo, traditional bows, fancier bows like this, whatever bows you have in mind, you certainly can do and just enhance everything. So now we're going to create a third bow, and this bow is the most easy out of all 3 of them. And what we're going to do is use this ribbon, and this is a 1.5 inch Swiss dot with kind of a champagne soft gold on top of a white ribbon. And we're actually going to leave the tails on this bow. We don't need to cut them separate, but we're going to start with just pinching one loop with about a 10 to 12 inch tail, depending on how big of a bow you want. And this bow is very nice for kind of wine bottles, smaller gifts, or imagine cutting 100 of these, you guys, and putting them on your Christmas tree. I think that would look so cool. So we're gonna take it, pinch it backwards. We created one loop with one tail. So pinch it backwards, create your second loop. And as I've said before, I don't usually, measure, I just eyeball. So there's our second loop. We're gonna create a third loop. We're going to do 2 on either side, and then something that I like to call a button loop, dead smack in the middle. So there's our second loop. Our third loop. So now we have 2 on either side. And now to finish off our bow, we're going to create a little button loop right in the middle. So with a button loop, I only want it to be about 1.5 inches or so, maybe even slightly smaller. It doesn't need to be large by any means. Then what we can do is cut off our tails, take our pipe cleaner, secure it to your bow, dovetail the ends, fold in half, cut from the middle out towards the wired edge. And there we go. So now what we can do is fluff that out, make sure it's as beautiful as we can get it, like that. And how pretty is that bow? So here's the 3 bows displayed on my wall, and I think also having them either on your wall or on a picture frame would also be really, really cool. Obviously the scale. So 3 completely different techniques that are very popular. We have our traditional bow up top right here, and we curled up those tails. We also have another form of a traditional bow with 4 loops, a button loop, and 2 tails. And this is the most typical bows you see available for purchase at, regular stores. So here's a quick way to make your own. And then we also have a fancier bow with lots of tails and lots of loops that look great on presents. So now you guys can show off how to make beautiful bows to all of your friends and for all of the gifts that you make this Christmas season. So thank you all very much for watching. This is Nick Kretikos of Nick's Seasonal Decor, and you're watching me on Home Talk. Bye, everyone.